Welcome back, everyone. Please first let me know if audio and video both are working fine. Okay. Yeah. So let's move on. So until now we have discussed all the non-renewable sources, and after that we discussed about solar energy, wind energy, and geothermal energy. Now the last energy source that we are going to look at in today's class is about bioenergy. Now, in case of bioenergy, what we are saying is that this is an energy which is being derived from biological sources and hence called as bioenergy. So that's why this is energy of biological origin derived from biomass. All right, biological origin derived from biomass, such as fuel wood, livestock manure, municipal waste, or energy crops. Now, in all this, when it comes to especially energy crops, they are the most widely used in case of getting bioenergy. Now, when we say energy crops, the meaning of energy crops is that this is a kind of crop from which we can get energy, meaning that these are crops from where you get carbohydrates. These are crops which are good sources of carbohydrates, because carbohydrate, you know this, right? Carbohydrates provide energy. So because carbohydrates provide energy, these are crops which are called as energy crops because they are good sources of carbohydrates. Now in this particular scenario, when it comes to bioenergy is derived from something called as biomass. Now, in case of biomass, biomass is biological material which is derived from living or recently living organisms. Biological material derived from living or recently living organisms, either plant or an animal. So, wherever we are producing this, wherever we are generating energy from plants or animals, this is where we'll call it as bioenergy. Now, in case of bioenergy, what we see is that there are various different ways in which we can look at bioenergy. It can be a plant source, it can be an animal source, and even an organic waste from domestic waste, or let's say even industrial waste, agricultural waste. All this also can be counted as biological material on or biomass. Now, overall, for bioenergy, one term that is often in the news is feedstock. Now, this term feedstock means nothing but the raw material. Feedstock means raw material that we are using for bioenergy will be called as bioenergy feedstock. Now, in one when it comes to feedstock, we know that there are various different types of feedstocks. It can be crops, it can be waste, it can be fuel, it can be wood. All these things can be used as feedstock. Now, overall, when it comes to biofuels, again let me just revise all these terms that we have just seen. We have bioenergy, biomass, energy crops, and feedstock. Right? So we discussed about these four terms, and then we have biofuel. So bioenergy is nothing but energy that we are deriving from biological source. So this is nothing but energy from biological source. Then we have biomass. So biomass is nothing but biological material, whether derived from plants or animals. These are biological material. Then we have energy crops. Energy crops basically are carbohydrate rich crops. Carbohydrate rich crops. Then we have feedstock. Feedstock means nothing but the raw material that we are using as a source for bioenergy. And then lastly, we have biofuel. Now, biofuel, obviously, this is a fuel, hydrocarbon based fuel, that we are using or we are generating using biomass. Now, when it comes to this, we are saying that this is also a hydrocarbon based fuel. Now, if this is based fuel, in case of petroleum, or let's say in case of fossil fuel also, we discussed that that's also hydrocarbon based fuel. If I ask you, can you tell me what is the most important difference between biofuels and fossil fuel? Can you tell me this? What, according to you, is the most important difference between biofuel and fossil fuel? Okay, Prithvi, you are correct. Shilpa, you are correct. Himadri, right? Okay, so let me tell you the most important, what we know. Some of the answers that you've given, they are correct, but they are obvious that, for example, they are fossil. One is something that we are getting from fossils, and one we are getting from crops. Now, most importantly, I would say the indicator is time. Most important indicator here is time. The time that it takes for the formation of biofuels versus the time that it takes for the formation of fossil fuels. All right. So in case of fossil fuels, we discussed for coal that it takes up to 300 million years. Whereas even in case of petroleum, although we did not discuss, but in case of petroleum also, it takes almost 250 million years for the formation of petroleum to happen. Compared to that, biofuel formation happens within weeks, a couple of weeks' time, maybe a month's time, maybe a couple of months' time. That's it. So time is the biggest factor. Yes, it is, one is renewable, one is non-renewable, one is coming from fossils, other one is coming from recently dead plants and animals. But most important factor is the time factor, that biofuels take a lot less time, not comparable at all as when it comes to the fossil fuel time. So that's why when it comes to biofuel, we are talking about fuel of biological, or let me say fuel from biomass feedstock in small time period. All right, this is what we can call as biofuel. So fuel from biomass feedstock in small time period will be called as biofuel. So that's why time becomes the most important factor, that in case of biofuels, we are generating this in a short period of time. All right, so small mistake, let me write it short and not small. Short time period. All right, so that is what biofuels are. So in case of biofuels, we'll say that these are hydrocarbon fuel produced from organic matter, basically biomass, in a short period of time. All right, days, weeks, or maybe months. So that is what biofuels are. Now, most importantly, there are three types of biofuels: bioethanol, biodiesel, and biogas. Now, before we go into the specifics of what is bioethanol, what is biodiesel, what is biogas, first thing that we need to know about biofuels is the generations into which we divide the biofuels. We have the first generation, second generation, third generation, and fourth generation biofuels. First generation biofuels is where we are deriving energy from food crops. So these are food crops based fuel. All right, these are food crop based fuels, so these are called as first generation biofuels. Now one thing that becomes important in this particular scenario is that they are more polluting compared to they are more polluting compared to third or the fourth generation biofuels. Now, obviously, their pollution is not comparable to fossil fuels. Compared to fossil fuels, obviously, this is very low amount of pollution. But when we compare to the third or the fourth generation, the first and the second generations are relatively more polluting. Then coming to second generation biofuel, here we see that we are talking about crops which are based on agricultural waste, municipal waste, or non-edible crops. They are also called as advanced biofuel, and the same logic applies here that they are more polluting compared to third and the fourth generations. Now, after this comes the third generation biofuel, and third generation biofuel is interesting because here we see a lot of improvement compared to the first and the second generation. Because in third generation biofuel, we first and foremost are using algae. We are using algae as third generation biofuel. Now, in case of third generation biofuel, because of the use of algae, we see that they are less polluting. But in simple terms, we say that they are carbon neutral. They are carbon neutral, meaning that they do not add extra amount of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere as compared to the intake. So that's why we say that they are carbon neutral. Now, using algae has its own advantages. Because of the use of algae, we see that we add a lot of advantages. Now, just understand what are the advantages that algae has. First, algae grows underwater. It grows underwater, so there is no competition for resources. Because in case of, let's say, first generation biofuel, we see that these are all based on crops, and crops have to be grown in the field. So then there will be a fight for the land resources. So that's one problem that we have with the first generation, but algae will not have that problem since it grows underwater. Then it has a higher efficiency, or let's say higher productivity. It has higher productivity, so that also becomes very very crucial because you will be able to get more energy per unit volume. That you, for example, let's say out of 100 grams of out of 100 grams of, let's say, algae, you will be able to produce like 40% or 50% efficiency, whereas in case of other crops the efficiency levels are lower. So higher productivity, and then they grow in short period of time, so they take less time to grow. They take less time to grow, so that also becomes very crucial because while the other crops will take a month's time or maybe some extra time apart from a month, Whereas in case of biofuels, sorry, in case of algae or algae based biofuel, we'll see that within a couple of weeks time they would have grown, and then you can derive energy from them. So that's why we see that algae gets its own advantages, and that's why third generation biofuel always will be better as compared to first and the second generation. But using third generation is not that easy. We have been able to get energy experimentally from third generation, but largely third generation is not being used because we are still trying to figure out how to commercially make it viable. All right. uh, we're still trying to make it commercially viable. So this is one problem that we have with algae, and that's why you need to have that much availability of algae that you can grow in such large amounts. So, for example, the crop productivity is huge compared to the amount of algae that we can grow. So that's why algae availability will always be in a limited quantity, and that's why you cannot get a lot of fuel from there. Plus, the technology related to it is also very difficult to implement, and that's why it is also going to be a lot more uh, uh, value investment. It will need a lot more value investment or money investment as compared to any other source. So that is what we see with regards to the third generation. Then we have the fourth generation. Now, in case of fourth generation biofuel, this is still, you can see, in a manner in an experimental stage. We are just trying to figure out what exactly fourth generation can be. There are various aspects of fourth generation that the world has been trying to figure out as of today. So that's why it is in an experimental phase. There are various different methods being used. For example, genetically modified organisms or microorganisms, or even the second stage resources with carbon sequestration. So whatever, basically what it means is carbon sequestration. Do you know what is carbon sequestration? You know the meaning of the word carbon sequestration? It is basically about s- capturing and storing, capturing and storing carbon dioxide. So that's where this carbon will be captured and stored inside the earth, and this is called as carbon sequestration. So these are things which are being tried in terms of fourth generation biofuel. Remember that it is still in the experimental phase. So there's nothing significant that has happened yet. A lot of experiments across the world happening with regards to understanding of what can become our fourth generation. So that's why we need to understand these aspects of the fourth generation biofuel. So overall, that's why practically speaking, what we need to focus on is first, second, and all the third generation biofuel. And fourth generation biofuel, neither it has been mentioned in India's biofuel policy nor other parts of the world. Also, they also haven't mentioned it in their policies. So it's more about what we can do next and where can we move next and how can we improve upon what we already have. So that will in the future become the fourth generation biofuel. Now, overall, when it comes to biofuel, what we basically see is that there are two major types of biofuel. First of all, one is biodiesel and the second one is bioethanol. So biodiesel is when we are using oil seeds, when we are using oil seeds, and oil seeds undergo the process of esterification, and by undergoing esterification they produce biodiesel. And this biodiesel, it can either be blended with or mixed with, or it can even replace diesel. Right now the target that we have in India is of 5% blending. We want to achieve 5% blending in India with regards to biodiesel. Similarly, when it comes to bioethanol, in case of bioethanol, we largely use energy crops. We largely use energy crops, and these energy crops, like even sugar beet, sugar cane, corn, etc., these energy crops, they will undergo the process of fermentation, and by using the process of fermentation we can make bioethanol out of it. And this bioethanol either can be blended with or mixed with, or it can replace petrol altogether. Right now the target in India is 20%, that we want 20% blending of bioethanol with petrol. So this is where we see that these two are the primary sources of biofuel for us right now. The third one is biogas, about which we'll just discuss in the next 10 minutes. Now, looking at biodiesel and bioethanol, biodiesel is something that will be able to reduce carbon dioxide exhaust emissions by up to 80%. All right, carbon dioxide exhaust can be reduced by up to 80%, produces no sulfur dioxide. All right, so 100% reduction in sulfur dioxide, can reduce smoke or particulate matter, that is PM 2.5 and PM 10, by up to 75%. And at the same time, so all these pollution parameters, they can drastically reduce pollution. Also, there are other benefits that we get out of biodiesel. One benefit has been that it has a higher flash point, meaning that it can be ignited at a higher temperature compared to petroleum diesel. Petroleum diesel at 70 degrees Celsius, biodiesel at 150 degrees Celsius. So it becomes a safer fuel as compared to petroleum diesel. And then lastly, it also improves upon it also improves upon lubricity. It provides significant lubricity improvement over petroleum diesel. So that's why they can actually last longer, and hence they also become crucial from that perspective. So overall, we see that there are all these parameters where biodiesel becomes crucial, and hence now we want to start using biodiesel, start mixing biodiesel with existing diesel, and it will be able to reduce the emissions altogether in biodiesel. Sorry, in case of petroleum diesel. Now, one more resource related to biodiesel has been Jatropha. And Jatropha has been in the news on and off for, I would say, last 20 years, that it has been in the news. Initially, with regards to Jatropha, we saw certain advantages, and that's why we wanted to use Jatropha as our primary fuel. We wanted Jatropha to become our primary resource for biodiesel production. So this is where in this we are talking about early days of biodiesel, early 2000s, when we had the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government, and Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, he was the president of the country. Now Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, he had started growing Jatropha in Rashtrapati Bhavan, because he wanted to showcase to the farmers of the country that, look, this is so simple that even I can grow it in my backyard. So obviously if we want to produce it agriculturally, we can. And with Jatropha, the advantage that we saw was that Jatropha can be grown anywhere. Roadsides, side of the railway tracks, you can say near the farms or at the edges of the agricultural land, does not have real requirements for some kind of soil. So even in low, let's say low productivity soil also it can be grown. In alkaline soil also it can be grown. Low rainfall areas and high rainfall areas it can be grown in. So we saw that there are all these advantages that we have with biodiesel, I mean we have with Jatropha, and hence we wanted to use Jatropha as a source of biodiesel, and we saw a lot of potential in Jatropha. So the government also started promoting it. It was also a part of the biofuel policy of back in 2009. But so government showed a lot of interest in it. UPSC also showed interest. A question was also asked from Jetrofa. But then after that, we see that everyone loses interest. Government loses its interest. The UPSC also loses interest. And then after that, uh, everyone stops talking about Jetrofa. So, so what happened with Jetrofa? What did go wrong, because of which we stopped thinking of Jatropha as our resource? Overall, with Jatropha, what happened next was the fact that we found problems with Jatropha when we start scaling up. Initially, we were just experimentally looking at what is a resource. So Jatropha is a resource. There are Jatropha fruits from where you get Jatropha seeds. Jatropha seeds can is where you can extract Jatropha oil, and from Jatropha oil you make Jatropha based biodiesel. Now, when we started scaling up the industries, when we became serious about biodiesel, this is where we found problems with Jatropha. The first problem was that it takes long time to grow. Takes 6 months or more than 6 months to grow. It can take up to 6 months or more to grow. Then the second problem with Jatropha was the fact that we understood that Jatropha, not only the fact that it takes longer to grow, it has low productivity, or let's say low efficiency. Low efficiency meaning that if you have, what we saw was that if you, let's say, have 100 kg of Jatropha oil, from 100 kg of let's say 100 kg of Jatropha seeds, then from 100 kg Jatropha seeds you get only 20 kg of Jatropha oil, and then from there on you derive the biodiesel. So that's why the percentage conversion is just around 15 to 20%, which was very low. For others, you have 35 to 40%, or maybe beyond that. But in case of Jatropha, we saw that it was just 15 to 20%. And this is where we realized that if we want to scale up this industry, the amount of requirements that we have, Jatropha doesn't stand there. It doesn't become commercially viable, it doesn't become cost effective. And hence, we understood that Jatropha cannot become our primary source as primary source as a biodiesel resource. So then after that we started ignoring Jatropha, and you will see that from the policies also, policy frameworks also, Jatropha vanished. That although we still see it as an additional resource, but we used to see it as a primary resource, and that's not the case anymore. Because now, if you look at the 2018 policy, does not really talk about Jatropha as such, and we understand that Jatropha isn't really uh, seen as a viable option anymore because of these issues that we saw with Jatropha. Now, coming to bioethanol, in case of bioethanol, also we understood that bioethanol also can become a very, very important fuel, that it can reduce emissions of carbon monoxide by up to 30%, volatile organic compounds by up to 50%, and nitrogen oxides by up to 35%. In case of even carbon dioxide, it can reduce carbon dioxide by 40% easily. And overall, that's why it can lead to greenhouse gas emission reduction by as high as up to 85%. So obviously, bioethanol also becomes a very, very important contributor. And obviously, because it also has no sulfur, so that's why no sulfur dioxide, and that also makes it a very clean source. So bioethanol also, we understood that bioethanol becomes a very important source for us, and it can lead to uh, uh, a lot of important, you can say, uh, improvements in the environmental factors. So that's why biodiesel and bioethanol, they, both of them, they become very crucial. They become very crucial from the perspective of getting energy, getting clean sources of energy. The third one is biogas. Now, in case of biogas, again, just remember, as we discussed about natural gas, In case of biogas also, largely it is made of methane. It is produced by breakdown of organic matter in the absence of oxygen. So what we do is, if you look at this figure, we gather all the waste. It could be agricultural waste or animal waste or cow dung, etc. All this will be taken to an anaerobic digester. What is anaerobic? I'm sure you know it. What is the meaning of anaerobic? Yeah, without oxygen, absence of oxygen, correct. So anaerobic means absence of oxygen. So anaerobic digester means that you have this digester where you have cut off or limited the supply of oxygen, and in this limited supply of oxygen, the decomposition of the matter starts. All the animal or the plant base, now it starts to decompose, and as this decomposition happens, we see that there are gases that escape from here, and they go to the gas holder, and this is what biogas is. So this is where we get the biogas from, and all the leftover can go and become biofertilizer. So all the leftovers can be used as biofertilizers, and the gases that we have generated, it can be used in various ways. It can be used as uh, it can be used as a domestic fuel. It can be used as a source of electricity. We can use it. So overall, when it comes to biogas, the composition of biogas again primarily is methane, up to 75%. Up to 75% it is just methane. So methane, then carbon dioxide, small amount of hydrogen sulfide, moisture, and even oxygen, nitrogen oxides or nitrogen dioxide, etc. So all these gases can be present, but largely again it is methane. Up to 75% by composition, it's just methane in case of biogas. Now overall, again, biogas can be used in various ways. As I told you, that you can use it for electricity generation, you can use it as a domestic fuel for cooking also. So overall, there are ways in which biogas can be used. Now there is one peculiar thing that we need to understand about biogas, and this is about one advantage that biogas has. And this advantage of biogas is in terms of how it can help against global warming. Now, advantages wise, there are other advantages that you anyway know of, that it is renewable source, it is a clean source of energy. Uh, Abundantly, you have the resources from where you can generate it. It can become a remote solution. It can become a solution for the villages. Uh, so there are all these things. Investment requirements are also pretty low. So we know that there are all these advantages that biogas has, but there is one major thing about biogas where it also helps us in offsetting methane. Understand how? Suppose if you consider cow dung. Now, naturally, also cow dung decomposition will happen. Even if, let's say, on the roadside or maybe somewhere, if you see cow dung, you might have noticed that within a week, that cow dung would have just decomposed. Have you seen it? That if it is even lying somewhere on the sides of the roads, etc., within a week's time they would decompose because of the action of decomposers or the action of bacteria, etc. They would lead to decompose. If you have seen, you might have observed. If you've not seen, no need to go and observe it and go and watch a cow dung every day. Not required. Just know that naturally also decomposition does happen. So now this natural decomposition leads to emission of methane, and this methane will go and add to the atmosphere. Now if we were not adding a lot of greenhouse gases due to anthropogenic activities like carbon dioxide and even methane that we add due to various industrial activities, then this natural methane going and mixing with the atmosphere wouldn't be a problem. But in the presence of a lot of additions that we are also doing, this extra addition can become a burden. This is where biogas helps, because when you, let's say, use the same cow dung, in an anaerobic digester, and if you are creating or rather generating biogas out of it, then using biogas means that you are using that biogas or that uh, methane for combustion. And combustion again means the same reaction that we had seen in methane hydrates. Combustion means in a manner oxidation. So then it produces carbon dioxide and moisture. All right, it produces carbon dioxide and moisture. So hence what happens is that instead of emitting methane, you emit carbon dioxide. So the manure that is left to decompose releases two gases, nitrogen dioxide and methane, and both are way more dangerous compared to carbon dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide can warm the atmosphere by up to 300 times, whereas methane can uh, heat up the atmosphere up to 25 times, sometimes even up to 60 to 80 times more than carbon dioxide. So that's why it's better to produce huge amount of electricity out of it, and instead of emitting methane we would be emitting carbon dioxide. So I'm just writing it here: using animal waste for biogas generation helps in reducing methane emissions. Helps reducing methane emissions. So that's why we would be uh, we would try to make sure that we use methane instead of, sorry, we use methane as a biogas instead of letting it decompose naturally. Now, coming to a very, very important topic, and this is about the National Policy on Biofuels of 2018. Now, we had a 2009 biofuel policy, and then we had a 2018 biofuel policy. 2009 biofuel policy could not achieve a lot of targets that were set, and forget about not achieving, it could not even come near achievement of the targets, because although we had kept a lot of targets, but a clear roadmap was never made to attain those targets. So the focus wasn't there, in a manner you can say. And also since 2009 there have been a lot of technological advancements that have been used in terms of 2018 biofuel policy. And in case of 18 by 2018 biofuel policy, we have seen that we are more or less moving in line with what we wanted. So in case of 2018 biofuel policy, the objective is that we want to achieve an indicative target of 20% blending of ethanol in petrol and 5% blending of biodiesel in diesel to be achieved by 2025. Now, initially in 2018, the target year was 2030. But then in 2021 amendment to the policy, it was now changed to 2025 instead of 2030. So this was the original date. This was supposed to be the original, not date, let's say timeline. This was supposed to be the original timeline, and this became 2025, became the revised timeline in 2021. Now, when it comes to the national policy on biofuel, there are certain things that become very crucial. And first, that for the first time, a proper categorization has been done. Proper categorization into the first, second, and third generation biofuel. Until now, we were not using these kind of categorizations. So for the first time now we started using this categorization into first, second and third generation biofuel. So that became very very important, because now we have clear categories of what belongs to what generation. Then the scope of raw material. For the first time the scope of raw material has been clearly defined. So for example, what all we can use as crops or what we can use as raw material. For example, there are sugar based crops that we can use. For example, you have sugarcane. Similarly, we have defined the use of starch based crops. Starch based crops, where you can say corn can become an example. So sugar based crops and starch based crops. Then agricultural waste. Agricultural waste. Now in agricultural waste also they have defined what can be used as agricultural waste. For example, you have crop residue. So crop residue can be used. Then even broken rice, or damaged grains. And interestingly, they have also mentioned rotten potato, because potato obviously is very staple to the entire country. Everywhere you go, any part of the country, in one form or the other, we do consume a lot of potato. Now potato obviously is a big source of carbohydrate, so we can use it as a source for biofuel. But when we start using potato as a source of biofuel, obviously it will lead to rise in prices of potato. So that's why we don't want to use potato. So then that's why they said that okay, fine, potato cannot be used, but rotten potato can be used. Rotten potato, instead of going into the markets, instead of let's say going into your samosas and dosas, now the rotten potato can go in the biofuel production plants. So that's why rotten potato has been mentioned. So overall it will have a clear positive impact altogether. Then apart from agricultural waste, municipal waste also has been mentioned. Municipal waste also has been mentioned. So agricultural waste can be used, municipal waste can be used. Then they also have mentioned crop surplus. Now using crop surplus means what? Using crop surplus means that any extra, or whenever you have bumper crops. So in case of extra productivity, better, very, very good productivity, also what we observe is that the farmers lose. You might have come across this situation, you might have read about it, that farmers lose when the productivity is very low, because they are not creating enough, so hence they are not getting enough. Even if the productivity is extremely high, the farmer loses there, because then the supply drastically improves, and because of huge supply, the demand is constant, supply is huge, prices drop. And then because of the operational movement and the transportation costs, etc., farmers actually lose money on that. So what they would do is they would just throw away the extra crops, because it is not of no use for them, and it is generating low cost in the market because of that. Now what the government says is that this surplus can be sold to the government, where the government will try to use this as a source of biofuel. It is something that will generate waste from, I mean, energy from waste. This is waste to energy kind of process that can be utilized here. Then one more raw material that has been mentioned is used cooking oil. Used cooking oil. Now, used cooking oil, you might know about this, that if you reheat the oil again and again, three times, four times, five times, then that oil is not good for your health anymore. Chemically, it starts to change if you have heated it to high temperature multiple number of times, and then it is not good for consumption. Now, what happens, especially let's say in hotels and restaurants, there is no measure of it. I mean, when you go to a restaurant or when you go to a hotel, you do not ask them whether they have used the same oil five times or not. You would simply go and you will eat and you will happily come back, right? So this is also where it has a negative impact on health, and hence this also has been included as a source or as a raw material, that used cooking oil by the restaurants etc. can be sold. That there will be agencies all across the country, and these agencies will buy the used cooking oil from these hotels, and then it will be diverted towards the the production of biodiesel. So all these have been clearly defined, so that's why it becomes very crucial, because until now we did not really define all the raw material clearly, and this is for the first time where we have defined the raw material clearly, and it definitely helps in that sense. Then protection to farmers. Now, protection to farmers in terms of surplus, what we discussed here in the scope of raw material, that they would get money for their surplus crops, so that also becomes a source of extra income for them. Then they have also considered viability gap funding for these resources. I mean, when it comes to viability gap funding is where the government has kept uh, this concept for any, let's say, any policy or any implementation, where apart from the budget that is already allocated to the policy or the scheme, extra amount of money might be required. So that extra financial aid is called as viability gap funding. So biofuels also have been kept under the purview of viability gap funding by India. Then boost to biodiesel production. We know that biodiesel production is difficult compared to bioethanol production. Biodiesel production is not that easy, and that's why production levels are lower. Amount of production is lower, and that is where we see that we are putting extra emphasis on biodiesel production in the country. So that's why these are some of the salient features of the biofuel policy. And because of this, what we see is that there will be a lot of benefits that we can derive out of the biofuel policy. First, we look at a reduced import dependency. Now, understand how. Using biofuel fuels means what? That if we are using biofuels, let's say we are using ethanol, bioethanol. So bioethanol will be mixed with petrol. We want 20% blending. We already have reached 20% blending in some of the cases. Up to 11.8% blending is happening over the country, and up to 20% blending is happening in some selected districts in the country. So if you are mixing 20% bioethanol with 80% petrol, obviously you have to import 20% less petrol. So if you are importing less, it means that you are spending less of forex reserves. So it will help in improving, this improves our forex reserves. It improves our forex reserves. So that's why this becomes very very crucial, and reduces import dependency and improves the forex reserves. For example, one 1 crore liters of E10 fuel. E10, the meaning of E10 is 10% blending. E10 means 10% blending. So similarly, when you have E20 fuel, if you see somewhere in the newspaper written E20, means 20% blending is happening. So 1 crore liters of E10 fuel can save up to rupees 28 crores worth of forex. Now, in a year, the total production can be huge. The total production in a year can be up to 200 crore liters of bioethanol, or let's say biofuel altogether. So just imagine, when we are talking about 200 liters, it means that if we are talking about 200 crore liters in a year, it simply means that we will be able to save up to rupees 5600 crores worth of forex in 1 year. So that's why we see a huge uh, change here. Similarly, when it comes to cleaner environment, it also reduces the emission of carbon dioxide. For example, again, if we take 1 crore liters of carbon, sorry, of E10 fuel, it reduces the total emission of carbon dioxide by 20,000 tons. 20,000 tons less carbon dioxide. So that's also a huge figure. Similarly, health benefits, because lower pollution, and also because of the fact that used cooking oil gets diverted. So that also becomes crucial. Then it helps in solid waste management. We know that we produce huge amount of organic solid waste every year. So that can be diverted towards making of second generation biofuel. So this helps in making of the second generation biofuel. Then apart from that, in case of infrastructure development, now infrastructure development, especially in the rural areas, can happen, and a lot of investments in these rural areas can happen, because when it comes to, let's say, setting up of a plant, it's not necessary that it happen in a certain geographical location, or maybe in a urbanized area only. Wherever you want, the infrastructure development can be done there. So that's why infrastructure investment in rural areas can be done. And this is where, again, we see that if, let's say, we have a plant, if we have a 1 kiloliters per day, if we have a 1 kiloliters per day plant, it can lead up to rupees 800 crores worth of investment in the rural economy. So that's why it's a huge investment. A lot of money can be infused towards rural economy, and it also leads to a lot of employment generation. That the same 1 kiloliters per day plant can give up to, or generate up to, 1200 jobs. 1200 jobs can be created by just one plant which has a capacity of 1 kiloliters per day. So that's why just understand that there are all these data that are in favor of the expected value that we can generate out of the policy, out of the biofuel policy. And of course, additional income to the farmers. This is by selling of the surplus, and also with biodiesel crop production. So overall, that's why there are a lot of benefits that we can derive out of this. So if you see, that's why if you look at this presentation of the national biofuel policy, additional income for the farmers, infrastructure investment can happen in the rural areas, then cleaner environment, then employment generation, waste to wealth, what we discussed about, that waste can be used and from there on we can derive energy. So this is waste to wealth, or also called as waste to energy. In short, we call these plants as W2E, waste to energy. So then there are health benefits, utilizing used cooking oil as feedstock for production of biodiesel, and reduced import dependency, as we discussed. So there are all these factors where we'll see that biofuel policy will have a positive impact altogether. Now, there are other schemes also. For example, there is the Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Yojana, where we are trying to provide financial support to bioethanol projects, that a total of 1969.50 crores worth to be provided for 5 years, between 2000, 2018 to 2023-24, that is this year until March. So that's why it will help in providing financial support and help in better implementation of second generation ethanol projects. Now, overall, when it comes to bioethanol, just also understand that apart from all these things that we see and all these uh, benefits that we have, there is one issue also that we will need to understand, and this issue is in terms of, let me take a new slide. This issue basically is in terms of how it can negatively impact food security. It can negatively impact food security. Now, how it negatively impacts food security, understand this, that first, what may happen is that it might lead to a lot of genetically modified crops or genetically modified organisms being produced, because then with genetic modification we will try to enhance their properties and make them useful for biodiesel or bioethanol production. We would not, I mean, instead of adding nutritional value, adding better health aspects to the crops, we might want to use it commercially. So that commercialization might lead to genetic modification or hybrid varieties coming into the picture, and this also can lead to lower food quality. It can lead to lower food quality because it can lead to lower food quality because ultimately what we are doing is that we are focusing on producing more, because the same crop has to be used as a food and also as fuel. And this is what where we are right now. If you look at the biofuel production of the world, you'll still see that majority of biofuel production that happens, it happens through only the first generation biofuel. Second generation is still in a very small uh, number or small quantity, and third generation almost absent, and there is no fourth generation practically. So right now you can say that most of the fuel production of the world is still dependent on first generation biofuel. So that's why what we might want to do is that we want to enhance the quantity, we want to produce more, and while producing more we might lower the food quality. So lower food quality, meaning that you are giving more emphasis on quantity of produce, more emphasis on quanting quantity of produce. So that also is one of the major problems. Then after that you also have to consider the cost factor. What may also happen is that especially the food import capacity for poor countries would reduce. Now, why am I saying this? Food imports, especially let's say when it comes to the poor country, they do not have a good working agriculture. They are largely dependent on the food imports. So imports will happen from Europe, from US, from China, from countries like India, Japan, all over the world. Now what happens is that in this scenario, when the food import is happening, when they are doing food imports, obviously the surplus that a country has, they are importing it, or some amount is being diverted there. Now, the countries might also want to divert these crops to biofuel production instead of exporting them, and that would mean that your supply decreases. In simple economic terms, what will happen in this scenario is that your demand remains constant, demand remains constant, supply decreases. Correct? Demand remains constant, supply decreases, which will mean what? it will simply lead to price rise, right? It will lead to price rise. Similarly, another way in which it may happen is that we will see that the same crops have to be used as both food and fuel. So what happens is that crops get diverted for biofuel production. Now, this can also lead to food price rise because our in this particular scenario, what happens is that overall demand has increased. Correct? The demand has increased because the crop now also has to be diverted towards biofuel production. Plus, our food requirements are intact. So overall, what it will do is that this would mean that your demand now has increased, right? Demand has increased. Demand is coming from both food and fuel. Supply is constant. It's not that you can simply change the supply or you can increase the supply as and when you want. So supply is constant, demand has increased, and this also means price rise. This also means price rise. So this is another possibility. Then after that, another possibility that we see in this particular scenario is the fight for resources. Fight for resources like land, water, fertilizer, etc. Fight for resources because uh, you have the same land available, you have that much water available. So whether you use it for crop production, for let's say food crops, or you want to use it for biofuel production. So there also there's a fight, and obviously fight will always mean that price of the resource will rise, and this also leads to price rise. So in this particular scenario also we'll see the same thing, that here in this case what happens is that resource price increases, and this also leads to price rise. So overall what we see is that until the time we keep using crops or food crops, it will lead to price rise, it will lead to decrease in the quantity available. Then another problem can be with water availability. Another problem can be with water availability, because water availability for domestic consumption would be threatened. Now understand how. If I ask you, for example, if I ask you that, can you tell me or can you give me the names of a couple of crops that use the most amount of water? Which are the crops that use the most amount of water? Paddy, rice, correct, and sugarcane, right? Now both of them, just see this, both rice and sugarcane, they are both usable as a biofuel. They are both usable as a raw material or as a feedstock for biofuel production. So what happens then? Water availability decreases. So you can, that's why, take examples like rice, sugarcane, etc., where they consume huge quantities of water. So that can lead to a fight for water availability as well, and that's why water availability for domestic consumption can be threatened. So that's why we also have to understand the negatives, the problems also that are associated with it. Yes, we do understand that it comes with a lot of positives, but it's not that it's all positive. There are certain issues that we'll always have to understand. So this is about biofuels. If you have any doubts, if you want to ask anything, please let me know now. Any question if you have. What is this generation meaning? See, the meaning of generation is nothing but whenever you do certain improvement in some of the parameters. Like when we are moving from first to the second generation, we, instead of using food crops, now we are using non-food resources like non-edible crops or the agricultural waste or the municipal waste. So anyway, in when you do some kind of improvement in some of the parameters, we'll say that it is nothing but a new generation. Anyone, any question? GMO basically means genetically modified organisms, where you make genetic changes so that you can improve upon some qualities of that organism. We'll discuss about that more in the bio. I mean, when we go to biotechnology chapter, so you will understand that better. Why diesel only comes to 5 percentage of blending with another? Mainly because of the fact that growing biodiesel or generating biodiesel is not that easy. The production of biodiesel compared to bioethanol production levels are very low, and that's why it takes a lot more effort to grow biodiesel, or rather to generate biodiesel, as compared to bioethanol. Third generation biofuel is also a threat for marine ecosystem because algae is primary food. Yes, you are completely correct here. That also is one of the negative factors that we need to consider for third generation biofuel in case of algae. That it will have a negative impact on the aquatic ecosystem. That's correct. Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Yojana slide. This is the slide. What is the weightage of in mains of science? Almost 35 to 50 marks in GS paper 3. Hmm. What can be the way forward to this negative impact on food security along with crops used for biofuel? The way forward is to look for non edible crops first and foremost. Look for non edible crops and try generating from second generation, that start diverting towards second generation. Whether it is agricultural waste or municipal waste or non edible crops, try to move towards that. It is something that becomes very crucial. Also, to find ways in which we can increase productivity without hampering the quality of the food. So we have to look for genetic modification in that sense, hybrid varieties in that sense, where you are getting the nutrition that you needed. At the same time, productivity levels can be increased, and hence we have surplus availability. Also, we should also look for new resources. For example, in 2021 amendment, we also added seaweeds to the list of all the raw material that we discussed. So we have to do all that to ensure that we do not offset the price of food resources. Right. Any other question, anyone? No. The next topic is nuclear energy, but it's a long topic. I want to start it tomorrow instead of just trying to rush with the topics today. Let's do that. I mean, let's start fresh. Nuclear energy is an important topic and also a bit difficult topic. So it's better you come with a fresh mind tomorrow morning and let's start our discussion on nuclear energy and nuclear technology. So we'll discuss nuclear energy and technology in the first half of the class tomorrow. Then we'll also have a discussion on the mains paper of energy, all the questions that have come in the mains examination from this chapter, and then we'll move on to space technology in our second half. So this is what we'll do in tomorrow's class. So we'll start at 10 a.m. as usual, and from there on, we'll continue until 8 p.m. in the evening. So with that, let's end the session today. And if you have any doubts, just go back, and if you get time, revise it. If not, anyway, you have the whole week ahead of you where you can revise, and then we can discuss on this later. So let's start with nuclear energy tomorrow fresh, and we'll continue from there on in tomorrow's class. Thank you.